There was a point a few years ago where I was working on a draft that felt completely broken, and I couldn't figure out why. The writing was fine, the scenes were fine, but every time I sat down to work on it, I felt this low level dread, like I was building something on ground that wasn't solid. And then someone asked me a really simple question about it. Who is this story actually about, and what do they want? And I realized I couldn't answer it. Not clearly, not in a way that actually meant anything. And that was the problem. Not the writing, the foundation. This video is about 6 questions that I think every story needs to be able to answer before it can really work. Not as a formula, as a foundation. Things that have to be in place underneath everything else. By the end of this video, you'll have a framework you can use in 2 ways. Either to build a new story from the ground up, or to diagnose why a draft you're already working on feels like it isn't coming together. Welcome everyone. If you don't know me, my name is Daniel, and this is the Story Renaissance. Question 1. Who is this story about? This sounds so obvious that most writers skip right past it. Of course I know who this story is about. We've been writing this person for months. But knowing who a character is isn't the same as knowing who the story is about. And there's a specific version of this question that actually matters. Who is the audience following? Whose eyes are we in? Whose experience is organizing everything else? In ensemble stories, this gets blurry fast. In stories with multiple POVs, it gets blurry even faster. And when it's blurry, the reader can feel it. Not as confusion exactly, but as a kind of distance. Like they're watching the story from the outside of it, rather than living it. What I try to nail down isn't just the name, it's whose emotional journey is the spine of the whole thing. Every scene, every choice, every consequence. Whose story does it ultimately serve? Breaking Bad is a useful example here because it has a genuinely large ensemble. Jesse, Skyler, Hank, Mike, Saul, and a lot of competing storylines that could easily pull the center apart. But you're never confused about whose story it is. Even the scenes Walter White isn't physically in exist in direct relationship to him. When Hank is getting closer to the truth, that scene is about Waltz. When Jesse is spiraling, that's about Waltz. When Skyler is quietly falling apart at the kitchen table, that's about Waltz. His transformation from desperate chemistry teacher to self-made drug kingpin is the spine, and every other character is either helping that transformation or being destroyed by it. Vince Gilligan knew whose story it was from the first scene. A man in his underwear in the desert holding a gun, and he never lost hold of it across 5 seasons and 62 episodes. That's what a clearly answered question 1 looks like. One spine, one journey everything else serves. If you can answer that clearly and specifically, you have somewhere to stand. If you can't, everything you build on top of it is going to feel unstable. But knowing whose story it is only gets you so far, because the next question is the one that actually puts the story in motion. And it's the one I see writers get wrong more than any other. Question 2. What does this character want? Not in a vague general sense. Specifically, concretely, what does this person want badly enough to drive them through an entire story? This is the question I see writers fudge more than any other. They'll describe a character's personality, their backstory, their relationships, and then when you ask what the character actually wants, you get something like they're looking for meaning or they want to feel whole. And those things might be true, but they're not strong enough to move a plot. Desire has to be specific enough to be frustrated. It has to be something that can be blocked, something that creates an obstacle when it meets resistance. Wants to feel whole can't be blocked by anything concrete. Wants to win back the person they lost can. There's also a distinction worth making here between what the character wants and what the character needs. The surface desire and the deeper one underneath it. The want is what drives the plot. The need is what the story is really about. Both matter, but the want has to be specific enough to generate friction. The Great Gatsby gets this exactly right in a way that I find genuinely instructive. Gatsby's desire isn't something vague like happiness, or a better life, or even love in some general sense. It's Daisy. Specifically Daisy. Specifically the green light at the end of her dock. Specifically the version of himself and his life that he believes only she can confirm. He throws the parties because she might hear about them and come. He buys the house in West Egg because it sits directly across the bay from hers. Every extravagant, desperate thing he does traces back to that one concrete want. And Fitzgerald makes it even more specific than that. It's not just Daisy now. It's the past version of Daisy, the 1917 version, the one he lost before he had the money to keep her. That one is so particular and so specific that you can feel it pressing against every scene. And underneath it, the need, the thing the novel is really about, is his refusal to accept that the past can't be recovered. The want is what drives the plot forward. The need is what makes the ending tragic. Both are doing their job. If you can say what your character wants in one clear sentence, something a stranger could understand without any context, you're on solid ground. But here's the thing about desire. It only matters if something can actually stop it. And that's where most writers run into the next problem. Quick aside, if you're trying to work through questions like these on a draft that isn't clicking, I run a community for writers called the Story Renaissance. We work through this kind of thing together every week. The link's in the description below. All right, back to it. Question 3. What's standing in their way? Every story is essentially a problem. The character wants something, something is in the way. The story is what happens in between. Conflict doesn't have to be a villain or an external antagonist, though it can be. It can be circumstance, it can be another person with competing desires, it can be something inside the character themselves, but it has to be real. It has to have teeth. It has to be genuinely capable of stopping the character from getting what they want. What I've noticed in my own drafts is that when I'm writing conflict that doesn't quite work, it's usually because I made the obstacles too easy to dismiss. Either the character can get around it too easily, or it doesn't connect directly enough with what they want. Good conflict isn't just friction for its own sake, it's friction that targets the specific thing the character is trying to do. The test I use is simple. Could the character fail because of this obstacle? Not will they, could they? If the answer is no, conflict isn't doing its job yet. The Old Man and the Sea gets this exactly right, because the whole novel is essentially just one man and one fish and the ocean between them. On the surface, that doesn't sound like much, but Hemingway makes the conflict work because the marlin isn't just a big fish. It's a test of everything Santiago has left. He's old. The other fishermen have stopped respecting him. He hasn't caught anything of significance in 84 days. His body is failing him, his hands cramp and bleed, and the fish pulls him further and further from the shore, further from help, further from any version of rescue. Every hour that passes is the conflict targeting exactly what Santiago can least afford to lose: his strength, his endurance, his pride, his last real chance to prove to himself and to the boy who still believes in him that he is still the fisherman he used to be. The sea isn't a random obstacle dropped into the story for drama. It's the one arena in the world where every one of his vulnerabilities gets exposed at once. That's why the novel is devastating, even though you know from very early on how it ends. Good conflict doesn't just block the character, it finds the exact wound and presses on it. Now, you've got a character, a desire, and something standing in the way. The next question turns all of that from an interesting situation into something the reader genuinely can't put down. Question 4. What happens if they fail? This is the stakes question, and it's one that I think writers sometimes underestimate because it sounds like it's just about raising the tension. It's actually about making the reader care. Stakes are the answers to the question the reader is always asking underneath the surface of the story. Why does this matter? What's actually at risk here? Why should I be worried? And the answer doesn't have to be life or death. Some of the most gripping stories have very small external stakes: a relationship, a job, a conversation that has to go a certain way. What makes stakes work isn't their size, it's their specificity and their connection to the character. The reader needs to understand exactly what the character stands to lose, not in abstract terms, in concrete personal terms. What does failure actually look like for this specific person? What gets taken away? What doesn't happen? What version of their life disappears? When I can answer that vividly and specifically, something changes in how I write every scene. Because suddenly every scene has weight. Every choice matters. The conflict isn't just structural anymore, it's personal. Sophie's choice is the example I keep coming back to for this. And not just because the stakes are extreme, though they are, but because of how precisely William Styron connects them to Sophie as a specific person. The novel's central horror isn't just an impossible situation. It's that impossible situation happening to this particular woman, with this particular history, who has already survived things that should have broken her, and carries that survival as both a gift and the source of unbearable guilt. When you understand what Sophie has already been through by the time the central choice arrives, what the camps cost her, what she's already lost, what she's already had to become to stay alive, the stakes don't feel like plot mechanics. They feel like the weight of an entire human life pressing down on a single moment. What she stands to lose isn't abstract. It isn't everything in some general sense. It's specific, and it's hers, and it connects directly to every wound the novel has already shown you. That's what makes it nearly impossible to read and completely impossible to forget. Stakes don't have to be large to work. They do have to be that specific and that personal, always. So now the reader is worried. Now they feel the weight of what's at risk. But there's one more thing that separates a story that grips you from one that just makes you anxious. And it has everything to do with what the character actually does next. Question 5. What choices must they make? This one tends to separate stories that feel alive from stories that feel like things that are just happening to someone. A character who reacts is interesting. A character who chooses is compelling. And there's a difference. Reaction is passive. It's the character being moved by events. Choice is active. It's the character stepping into the story and doing something that only they would do for reasons that are specific to who they are. The best choices in a story are the ones where there's no clean option, where the character has to give something up no matter what they decide, where the choice reveals something about who they actually are, not who they want to be, but who they are when it costs them something. What I ask myself is my character making decisions to drive this story forward, or is the story just dragging them along? Because readers want to follow someone who is in their own story, someone who is making it happen, even if what they're making happen is a mess. Crime and Punishment is built entirely on this. Raskolnikov doesn't stumble into killing the pawnbroker. He plans it. He theorizes about it for months beforehand, constructing an entire philosophical framework to justify it. This idea that extraordinary people exist above ordinary moral law, and that he might be one of them. Murder isn't something that just happens to him. It's something he decides deliberately, out of a specific and deeply held belief about who he is. And when it goes wrong, when the sister shows up unexpectedly, when the aftermath doesn't feel the way his theory said it would, when the guilt starts eating through the logic, every subsequent choice he makes is just as active and just as much his own. He could confess earlier, he chooses not to. He could stay away from the detective, he keeps going back. He could accept help, he refuses it. Dostoevsky never lets his circumstances carry him. Raskolnikov is always in there making it worse, driven by the same prideful internal logic that started the whole thing. That's what makes the novel so suffocating and so hard to put down. You're not watching events happen to someone. You're watching someone choose their way into a corner, one decision at a time. A character who owns their choices owns the reader's attention. But even a character who makes bold, active choices can leave the reader feeling empty at the end, if you can't answer the last question. And this is the one that separates a plot from a story. Question 6. How are they different at the end? This is the art question. And it's the one that, if you can answer it, usually means you have a plot, but not quite a story yet. Plot is what happens externally. Story is what happens internally. And the internal thing, the change in the character, is what the reader carries out of the book with them. It's what makes the whole experience mean something. The change doesn't have to be redemptive. It doesn't have to be positive. Characters can end in worse places than where they started. They can fail to change in ways that are just as meaningful as changing. But something has to be different. Something has to have shifted in who this person is, or how they see the world, as a direct result of everything the story put them through. What I found is that if I can't answer this question clearly at the start, I tend to write middles that meander, because the middle is where the change is actually happening, slowly, scene by scene. And if I don't know where it's going, I don't know what the middle is for. A Christmas Carol might be the clearest example of this in all of fiction. Dickens knew exactly who Scrooge was at the start, a man so ruled by fear and greed that he's cut off every human connection in his life, including the woman who loved him, including his own partner's death, including the poverty of the city around him. He feels nothing because he's chosen to feel nothing, because feeling costs something, and Scrooge doesn't pay for things if he can avoid it. And Dickens knew exactly who Scrooge needed to be at the end, a man cracked back open, someone who can weep at a grave, who can laugh with strangers, who can show up at his nephew's door full of Christmas cheer. Every ghost, every vision, every scene in between exists specifically to move Scrooge from that closed, defensive version of himself to the open one. The ghost of Christmas past makes him feel again. The ghost of Christmas present shows him what he's missing. The ghost of Christmas yet to come shows him what he's heading towards. There's no wasted motion, no scenes that are just interesting or atmospheric. Every single thing in the story is aimed at that change. That clarity is why it's been in print for almost 200 years. The change at the end is the point the whole story is building towards. Everything else exists to earn it. Here's what I've come to understand about these 6 questions, and it took me a while to see it clearly. They're not 6 separate things, they're one thing. They connect to each other in a chain, and when one of them is weak, the ones that depend on it are weak too. You need a clear protagonist to have a desire that means anything. You need a specific desire to have conflict that actually threatens something. You need real conflict to have stakes that feel genuinely dangerous. You need stakes to make the character's choices feel weighty. And you need all of that to earn the change at the end. Pull one out, and the whole chain breaks. Which is why I use these as a diagnostic tool as much as a building tool. When a draft feels broken, I go back to question 1 and I work forward. And almost every time, I find the weak link somewhere in these 6. Not in the writing, in the foundation. The writing is the easy part to fix. The foundation is harder, but these questions are how you find it. If you're sitting with the draft right now that you know isn't working, but you can't figure out why, if you've tried fixing the scenes and the structure and the prose, and it still feels hollow, this is exactly the kind of thing we work through in the Story Renaissance. It's a community for writers who are trying to finish, not a course, not a curriculum, just writers working on their projects together, asking the hard questions, and staying in it long enough to find the answers. We have a weekly Write Together live stream where you can just show up and work. And we talk through this stuff. Foundational questions, stuck places, what to try when the draft stops making sense. No gurus, just writers who get it. The link's in the description and the pinned comment below. I'd love to have you there. Here's what I want you to do after this video. Take whatever you're working on right now and try to answer all 6 questions out loud. Not in your head, out loud, or on paper. Who is this about? What do they want? What's in the way? What happens if they fail? What do they have to choose? How are they different at the end? If you can answer all 6 cleanly, you're in good shape. If you get stuck on one, that's your draft telling you where to work on. Now that you understand this, the next video you need to watch is this one I made about the moments that make readers fall in love with your characters. Because once your foundation is solid, your characters are what turn a working story into one people can't put down. 2 videos go hand in hand. I'll see you there.